My name is Willa Hartley. I am 67 years old. 11 days after we buried my husband, I sat in a leather chair at a lawyer's office on King Street in Hamilton and learned what 34 years of marriage was worth on paper. The house in Dundas went to my daughter. 4 bedrooms, flagstone driveway, double garage, appraised at $1.65 million. I received a cottage, 1,100 square feet on 40 acres in Haliburton County, 3.5 hours north, with a cracked foundation step and a road the township stops maintaining on December 1st. My son-in-law was sitting 2 seats to my left with a folio on the table, and when the lawyer finished reading my part, he capped his pen. He does that. It means the meeting is over for him. In the parking garage afterward, my daughter put her hand on my arm and said the sentence she had clearly rehearsed. "Mom, be realistic. Someone your age, alone up there all winter. I'm just being honest with you. You won't last." I left for the cottage 9 days later with 1 suitcase and my husband's old thermos. On the kitchen table of that cottage, sitting on a cloth my husband had wiped clean, was a rusted metal deed box. It had been waiting there since March. What was inside it had been waiting 31 years. Welcome to Fierce Mom Stories. This is where women who were counted out get to say what actually happened. Drop a comment and please subscribe. The next 6 weeks are the reason I'm telling this to anyone at all. I should tell you what I did for 31 years because it matters to everything that comes after. I was a real estate law clerk at a firm on James Street North in Hamilton. Title work, specifically, deed registrations, title searches, abstracting, the paperwork machinery underneath every property transfer in the city. I started in 1988, 7 months pregnant, told the managing partner I typed 80 words a minute, which was true, and that I would learn whatever else was needed, which also turned out to be true. I stayed until June 2019. I outlasted 4 senior partners, 2 recessions, and the transition from paper title to the Terranet electronic registry system. In 31 years, I processed close to 8,000 property transfers. I know how to read a chain of title the way a pharmacist reads a handwritten prescription. Slowly, from the beginning, watching for the place where something doesn't add up. I know what a severed mineral interest looks like inside a deed. I know what happens when an estate closes without accounting for one. I did not know that knowledge would be the most important thing I owned. Not until Bernard died. We married in August of 1989. Bernard taught high school science in Ancaster for 27 years and coached the school astronomy club for all of them. He had a laugh that carried through closed doors. He proposed over coffee, the drive-through kind, in a parking lot near the highway, which I have always thought was exactly right for who he was. We bought the Dundas house in 2007 for $495,000. He said the flagstones out front were the reason, and for Bernard, that was probably true. We paid it down steadily. By the time he retired in 2016, there was almost nothing left on the mortgage. He was diagnosed in September of 2024, prostate cancer, and not caught early. He died on April 3, 2025. He was 71. Our daughter Natalie is 43. She has always been the person in any room who already has the folder. She married Bryson 11 years ago. He's a real estate developer. Residential and mixed-use projects across the GTA and Hamilton. There's a directness to him that works well in a boardroom, and a way of moving through a space that tells you he's already done the arithmetic before you've finished the sentence. I want to be fair to both of them, because fair is the only tool I have that never breaks. I will try. The will was read on a Tuesday, 12 days after the funeral. The lawyer, a man named Dunmore, walnut conference table, 3 glasses of water, none of them touched, read it straight through. The house at 22 Rockcliffe Lane in Dundas, together with its contents, went to Natalie. She nodded with her eyes on the table. Bryson wrote something in his folio. Then Dunmore read my part. To my wife, Willa Jean Hartley, I give the Hartley family property at 88 Hawk Lake Road in Haliburton County, together with any interest I hold in the Hartley family mining assets registered in the district of Timiskaming. The residue of the estate, a joint checking account holding $34,200, split equally between us. Natalie's chin came up on the word mining. Bryson stopped writing. In the parking garage, Natalie took my arm. She came up behind me while I was waiting for the elevator. "Mom, be realistic. You're 67. That cottage needs a new roof and the road ices over in November. Someone your age, alone up there? I'm just being honest. You won't last a winter." I said I'd think about it. I thought about one thing in that elevator, and it was not the insult. It was that phrase. Any interest I hold in the Hartley family mining assets in the district of Timiskaming. Bernard wrote grocery lists in 3-letter abbreviations on the backs of old envelopes. He would not have paid a lawyer to draft a clause for something that didn't exist. I need to tell you how my daughter and I got to this place, because it did not start in that corridor. It started in the autumn of 2022. My son-in-law had a condo development stalled in a Hamilton neighborhood. 12 units, a financing gap, a deadline pressing. He came to our kitchen table with a spreadsheet and a careful explanation of why the problem was temporary. Bernard said yes before I had finished the second page. He drew $140,000 from our home equity line and transferred it to Bryson's holding company. The plan was a 6-month bridge. I saw the transfer on our joint account 3 days later and asked Bernard about it. He said Bryson had it handled, and he used the tone of voice that meant the conversation was closed. The money was never paid back. I knew that by the summer of 2023. Bernard knew I knew. We did not talk about it directly, which is its own kind of conversation. At Christmas of 2024, Bernard was down to 141 pounds and eating almost nothing, and Bryson sat at my kitchen table and told a story about a development deal with a punchline I did not find funny. Bernard looked at me across the table. Something moved across his face that I couldn't read. I read it in April of the following year. 19 days after the will was read, I came home from a physiotherapy appointment. My left knee, replaced in 2022, still needs twice-weekly maintenance. And my key did not work. Natalie was sitting on the front steps with 2 takeout coffees. She stood up when she saw me. "Oh, Mom, we had the locks changed. There have been problems in the neighborhood." There had not been problems. I checked the Halton Regional Police Service log that evening, because that is what 31 years of title work does to a person. She walked me through my own house like a guest. My reading chair was already in the garage. On the kitchen island was an invoice from a design studio in Westdale. Furniture, lighting, custom shelving. $31,000. The order date was February 19, 2025. Bernard died April 3rd. I did the arithmetic twice because I did not want to be the kind of woman who does that arithmetic. 6 weeks. She had ordered the furniture 6 weeks before he died. I want to be fair to my daughter, because fair is the only weapon I have that never jams. I know she had reasons. She decided a long time ago that she would be the person with the document rather than the person with the memory of a promise. I understood her. It did not make her less dangerous. 4 days later, Bryson sat across from me at the kitchen table, my kitchen table, and gave me a date. September 15th, Willa. The contractor needs the house clear. I asked where he thought I was going to go. He said, "You've got the cottage." Here is my arithmetic. My CPP is $1,080 a month. My OAS is $713. My pension from the firm is $620. That is $2,413 total. A 1-bedroom apartment in Dundas or Hamilton runs $1,950 to $2,200. I looked that night, sitting on a garden chair beside my reading chair in the garage. There was no room. I knew it before I finished looking. Then I did what I always do when a problem will not resolve. I went back to the original document. I pulled Bernard's copy of the will from the folder on the counter and read that clause again. And paper-clipped to the last page, something Dunmore had not read out loud. A photocopy of a deed from 1961, 3 pages, legal-size paper gone the color of old envelopes. I didn't fully understand it yet, but I recognized the shape of the sentence in the middle of it because I had read that shape several hundred times in my career. I needed the original. I own a blue hardshell suitcase, 24 inches, bought in 2001 for a trip to Portugal Bernard surprised me with for our anniversary. I packed 7 days of clothes, my blood pressure prescription, the good magnifying glass from my desk that the firm let me keep at retirement, and a flashlight. No batteries. I told myself I would get some in Minden. I left Dundas at 9:10 on the morning of Saturday, August 16th. It is 247 kilometers from my driveway to Hawk Lake Road. The 403 East, the 400 North, the 115 through Lindsay, then Highway 35 into the Haliburton Highlands where the Canadian Shield breaks the surface and the trees close in and the radio stations drop off one by one. 3 hours and 20 minutes with one stop. 12 days earlier would have been our 36th anniversary. I did not cry about it in the car. I cried at a rest stop outside Barrie, which is somehow worse. The turnoff at Hawk Lake Road comes up fast. There is a township sign on a cedar post, seasonal road, not maintained December 1 to April 15. I got there at 1:30. The lake was flat silver, and the light was doing what it does up in the highlands in mid-August, going long and gold across the water in a way that makes you feel as though you've arrived somewhere that has been waiting for you. The cottage looked worse than I remembered from our last visit in 2022. One shutter gone. A sag in the eaves over the front porch that was new. I took Bernard's key off the ring, brass, chipped green paint on the bow, and had to lean my shoulder into the door before the lock gave. The smell first, wood smoke, pine, the particular damp of a place that breathes through its walls. And then the sound. There is an old propane wall furnace from sometime in the 1970s. When it fires, it clicks 4 times before the flame catches. I turned the knob out of habit before I'd even set the suitcase down. 4 clicks, then the low whump of the burner. It filled the room and I stood there and breathed it in. 1,100 square feet. Main room, 2 small bedrooms, a bathroom Bernard's father had tiled himself in the early 60s. 3 mouse traps along the baseboards, all sprung, all empty, dust on everything. The gray felt kind that settles in a closed room, on every surface but one. The kitchen table is pine, 4 feet by 6, with a burn ring from an old lantern. It was clean, not cleaned last week, cleaned months ago by someone who did not expect it to get dirty again. In the center sat a green metal deed box, the old army surplus kind with the hinged lid. I knew that box. It had lived under Bernard's workbench in the Dundas basement since before we were married. He called it his father's files. I had never opened it. On the lid, in Bernard's block printing in the carpenter's pencil he used for everything, Willa, Hawk Lake, and beside the box a small freezer bag containing 4 AA batteries and a folded index card that read, for the flashlight. I stood in the doorway with my hand on the frame until my hands stopped shaking. He had known I would come. He had known I wouldn't have batteries. He had been in that room in March, when he could still drive, wiping a table clean. I brought in the suitcase. I made the bed. I ate crackers and peanut butter standing at the counter. I did not open the box until morning. I opened it on Sunday, August 17th, with coffee made on the propane range, at the clean pine table with the lake going from gray to silver in the window. Inside, everything was in order. Bernard organized things the way he wired a lamp, correctly, without needing to explain himself. Taped to the inside of the lid was an index card with 3 lines, each one a pair of recording references. I knew exactly what they were before I finished reading. The first folder held a certified copy of a Crown patent from 1961. Edgar Joseph Hartley, Bernard's father, had patented a mining claim of 16 hectares in the Larder Lake Mining Division of the District of Timiskaming. The patent converted a staked mining claim into full freehold property. Edgar owned those 16 hectares, surface and subsurface both, the way you own a house. The second folder held a deed from 1963 in which Edgar sold the surface rights to a forestry company for $3,400. In the granting clause, in the same typewriter face as everything around it, sat the line I have read in different forms hundreds of times across different deeds from different decades. Accepting and reserving unto the grantor, his heirs and assigns, all mineral rights in and under the said lands, being the mining rights attached to the original Crown patent dated the 12th day of January 1961. He sold the top. He kept the bottom. The third folder held a letter from 1992 from a company called Ridgetop Minerals Limited in Toronto, advising Bernard Hartley of Ancaster, Ontario, that they held a lease on the surface rights in the Larder Lake Mining Division and had intersected a copper-nickel-bearing structure beneath the patented lands. They proposed to negotiate a royalty agreement for any production attributable to the Hartley reserved mineral rights, pending confirmation of title. The fourth folder was the thick one, 22 letters. Carbon copies in the early years, printouts later. The first was dated March 7, 2003. The last was dated March 6, 2025, which was 26 days after they gave him a number of months rather than a prognosis. I counted them twice at that table with my coffee going cold. 22 letters, 22 marches. I had made him breakfast on every one of those mornings. I did not yet fully understand what a royalty confirmation required or why a title gap created the problem it did. I am a title person, not a mineral production person. But I have spent my life reading the shape of a file, and the shape of that file was a man asking the same question once a year for 22 years and receiving a different version of the same non-answer every single time. Surface rights and mineral rights are two different pieces of property. You can sell one and keep the other. Once they separate, they stay separate. Sometimes, for a century, and the two chains of title travel through different registries in different directions. Edgar sold the top in 1963 and kept the bottom. Then he died in November of 1978. I put the patent down and looked around that cottage. The cracked foundation step, the missing shutter, the sag in the eaves. I had been told I inherited a problem property. What I had actually inherited was the mineral rights to 16 hectares in active copper-nickel production in northern Ontario, inside a cottage that needed a new roof. My son-in-law called that same evening, just before 6. He was warm. That is the part that always surprises people when I tell it. He asked about the drive up, asked about my knee. Then he asked his question, and he asked it twice, 10 minutes apart, dressed in different words each time. Did you find anything up there, like paperwork or old files? I said there were quite a few of Bernard's things at the cottage. Right, but anything official looking. He had this thing about squirreling papers away. I said I would let him know what I found. A pause of about 2 seconds. Then his voice shifted to the register he uses when he has made a calculation. Willa, I want to be straight with you. That road is not maintained after December 1st. I looked it up. If something happened to you up there in January, nobody would get through until spring. I'm not trying to be harsh. I'm being practical. You won't last a winter up there alone. Same sentence. Third time I had heard it. First time I understood it wasn't grief. I wrote down the date and time on the back of an envelope. Then I said goodnight. Tuesday, August 19th. I drove into Haliburton. The County Land Registry office is in the building off Maple Avenue. The clerk showed me to the terminal and told me they maintain records going back to the mid-1800s, and I was welcome to sit and work as long as I needed. I found Edgar's Crown patent at the reference on the index card. I found the 1963 surface sale. Then I looked for what should come next. When a person dies owning real property in Ontario, the estate trustee registers a transmission application. It puts the property in the estate's name. Then, when the estate distributes to beneficiaries, a deed is registered. 2 instruments, closing the gap between the dead owner and the living one. I searched for both under Edgar Joseph Hartley. I found the patent. I found the 1963 surface sale. Then nothing. No transmission application, no deed of distribution, no registered transfer of any kind from 1963 onward. On the provincial record in the Ministry of Mines Registry, the mineral rights to 16 hectares in the Larder Lake Mining Division still belonged to Edgar Joseph Hartley, deceased November 1978. It took 2 hours and 40 minutes and $47 in certified copies. I sat in the car, in the parking lot, and said it out loud the way I always confirmed a finding before writing it in a client's file. Edgar's estate had been probated. Bernard was the heir. But nobody had ever registered the transfer. Nobody in 1978 thought Scrub Rock near Kirkland Lake had anything worth accounting for, so nobody inventoried it. And if you don't inventory it in the probate, you don't transfer it. And if you don't transfer it, on paper the owner is still a dead man. The next morning, I called the contact number from the Ridgetop Minerals letterhead. I was put through to someone in their mineral accounts division. Her name was Therese. She had the voice of someone who has explained the same synonym to many different callers and decided not to be impatient about it. I gave her the file reference from one of Bernard's letters. She pulled it up. She told me there was a royalty account associated with the Hartley parcel and that it was being held in suspense. I asked what suspense meant. She said it was where they held royalty payments they owed but could not safely release, usually because of a title question, a missing signed form, or an unconfirmed owner. In our case, she said, it was all three. I asked how long the account had been building. She said, the account had been accumulating since 2001, when production from the adjacent Ridgetop lease first intersected the Hartley mineral boundary. I asked what the balance was. She said she couldn't confirm the amount with me until I had established myself as the owner of record. I thanked her and was about to end the call when she went off script, the way Therese had apparently decided she would do when the situation warranted it. She said, "Mrs. Hartley, are you related to the gentleman who has been writing to us every spring?" I had to hold the phone away from my face for a moment. I said that was my husband. She said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. He was always very courteous in his letters." That night I went back through the fourth folder a second time, the way you go through something when a stranger has just told you it mattered. Inside the last letter, I found a sheet of lined paper, folded once, Bernard's handwriting. Dated March 3, 2025, 3 weeks after the diagnosis. He wrote it the way he talked, plain, in order, without decoration. He wrote that the box was his father's work and everything after it was his own. That he had tried 3 times to get Ridgetop to recognize him as owner. In 2004, they told him he needed a transmission application from the estate registry. In 2011, he filed a declaration himself, and they told him it wasn't the right instrument for a mineral title chain. In 2019, a clerk told him he needed something called a vesting order, and he didn't know what that was, and he was too embarrassed to call back and admit he still didn't understand it. Then he wrote the sentence I had to put down and pick back up twice before I could read it through. I thought about asking Willa a dozen times. She would have known what to do. But every time I sat down to start, I realized I'd have to explain why I had waited this long, and I had no good answer. So I kept trying to bring her an answer instead of a problem. I ran out of time for the answer. This is the file instead. At the bottom, in smaller letters crowded against the edge, everything in this box is real. It's just not finished. You'll know what to do. You always did. I did not take my husband's word for any of it. I want to say that plainly, because grief will make you believe a piece of notebook paper. On Wednesday, I spent 2 hours on hold with the Ministry of Northern Development, Mines, Natural Resources and Forestry before reaching 2 separate people who confirmed that patented mining claims in Ontario are registered real property and do not expire, and that a gap in the transmission chain can be corrected through a vesting order from the Ontario Superior Court of Justice. A silver pickup truck came down Hawk Lake Road on Thursday, August 28th at around 11 in the morning. The man who stepped out was somewhere in his 50s, canvas jacket, clean boots, the kind that have never been in lake country mud. He had a business card out before he reached the porch step. Aldous Strachan, Strachan Resource Consulting, Haliburton, Mineral Asset Valuations and Acquisitions. He was pleasant. He admired the lake. He said he had been aware of the Hartley mineral file for some time and was sorry for my loss and wondered whether I might be interested in a simple arrangement. He sat down on the porch step without being asked and made me an offer of $68,000 for the full mineral interest. All of it. Cash closing in 14 days. He would arrange the title correction himself. I asked how he knew to come here. He said he monitors certain files. It's his business. I said I would need to think about it. And that is when he said the line he would say again. Mrs. Hartley, I want to be honest with you. A mineral interest you can't see and can't prove you own isn't something most people can do anything with. You'd be much better off with something solid in hand. He left the offer letter under a rock on the porch railing because the wind was coming up off the lake. I went inside and opened the fourth folder and found what my hands already knew would be there. A letter from 2009 on the same cream letterhead, the same Haliburton office address. An unsolicited offer to Bernard Hartley for $22,000 for the full Larder Lake mineral interest. Bernard had written 2 words across the top in carpenter's pencil. Not interested. I called Natalie that evening. I made sure I sounded tired. I said a man named Strachan had come to the cottage about some old mineral papers of Bernard's. There was a pause of about 2 seconds. Then she said, "Oh, Strachan. Yes, Bryson knows him. He asked him to look into it as a favor to you, to see if anything was worth sorting out." I asked how long Bryson had known him. Since a project in 2018. They worked on adjacent sites up near Kirkland Lake. I wrote that down. Then Natalie said the thing that changed the color of the entire summer. She got a little impatient. That is her tell, same as her father's, and she said, "Look, Mum, Bryson told him months ago not to rush. He said, she's 67. She's alone up there. The road's a mess by December. He told Aldous you won't last the winter up there, and that he should just be patient." Then, quickly, in the voice of someone who has realized the tape is running, not that he was being cruel about it, he was just giving him a sense of the timeline. I wrote down the date, September 2nd, 2025, 8:47 in the evening. I drove into Minden the following Monday and sat down with a lawyer named Delphine Cote, whose 2-room office is above a hardware store on Bobcagian Road and smells faintly of coffee and old photocopier toner. She is 54. She let me lay out every document without interrupting once. It took 14 minutes and bought my complete trust. Then she told me what we needed. A vesting order from the Ontario Superior Court of Justice, establishing that the mineral rights in the Larder Lake Mining Division had passed from Edgar's estate to Bernard as heir, and from Bernard's estate to me as beneficiary. Once registered at both the Land Registry Office and the Mining Lands Administration System in Sudbury, Ridgetop would have a clean chain of title to pay against. She quoted me $2,800 plus disbursements. My pension that month was $2,013. I sold Bernard's aluminum canoe to a man in Carnarvon for $900 and a set of his woodworking tools to a man in Haliburton for $1,400. I paid Delphine before she filed a single page because I am not going to be the next person in this family who owes something they cannot say out loud. She also mentioned something I had not asked about. Under Ontario's Succession Law Reform Act, a surviving spouse has 6 months from the certificate of appointment to elect against the will and receive an equalization of net family property instead of the bequest. She said I had a real claim and a real deadline. I said no. She wrote that down without pressing me, which is why I trusted her. I found the second page on Friday, September 5th, and I found it the way I have always found things. By being methodical about what doesn't add up. The envelope for the vesting order application was heavier than it should have been. I have handled enough paper in my working life that my hands know a weight before my brain names it. Inside, folded twice and held to the back of the main document with a corner of old tape, was a second sheet in Bernard's handwriting, same date as the first, March 3rd, 2025. He wrote about the money first. In September of 2022, he had drawn $140,000 from the home equity line of credit on the Dundas house and transferred it to Bryson's Development Holding Company to bridge the Hamilton project. He had expected repayment within 8 months. By the time he wrote this letter, 29 months later, nothing had come back. He had been paying the monthly interest out of his teacher's pension without telling me because he was ashamed, and because he kept believing The next quarter would be the one where Bryson made it right. Then he wrote about the will. In the autumn of 2023, he went to the county law library and asked the librarian to help him find the relevant section of the Ontario Succession Law Reform Act. He copied it out longhand. The copy was in the box, in his pencil. A specific bequest in a will passes to the beneficiary subject to any charges or encumbrances on the property at the date of death, unless the will expressly provides otherwise. The residue of the estate does not discharge those debts on behalf of the beneficiary. Underneath the statute, he wrote it in his own words, and I am going to tell you exactly what he wrote. I gave her the house because she was going to find a way to have it regardless. I made sure she understood what comes attached to it, and I gave you the only thing in this family that isn't borrowed against. Then the last part, the part I had to put down and pick up twice. I know you'll be angry that I didn't say any of this sooner. You have every right. I didn't know how to bring you a problem this size without a solution ready to go with it. I kept waiting until I had the answer. I ran out of time, so here is the file instead of the answer. You were always better at the files than I ever was. I did not take his word for any of the financial claims. The Terranet record for the Dundas house is searchable online. The HELOC was registered September 14, 2022. Credit limit $140,000. One borrower, Bernard James Hartley. I then asked Dunmore's office, as an interested person in the estate, for the lender's payoff statements. They arrived in 11 days. HELOC balance at date of Bernard's death, $140,000. The interest had been paid on time each month. The principal had never moved. The estate checking account held $34,200. The HELOC on the house was $140,000. Under Ontario succession law, the house passed to Natalie with the debt attached. The estate was not required to clear it. Delphine filed the petition on September 9th. Notice went to all interested parties, which by then meant me and Natalie and Bryson as estate trustee. My son-in-law never responded. I do not think he read it. On October 2nd, the Ontario Superior Court of Justice signed the vesting order. 2 pages. It established the chain of title, Edgar Hartley to Bernard Hartley to Willa Hartley. On October 4th, I stood at the Land Registry Office counter in Haliburton and registered the certified copy. Then I drove to the Service Ontario office and sent the corresponding registration to the Mining Lands Administration System in Sudbury. The clerk there stamped it and handed the receipt back across the counter. 63 years from the day Edgar signed the deed that split surface from minerals, closed with a $75 registration fee and a rubber stamp. That afternoon I couriered the full packet to Rigitop Minerals. Vesting order. Transmission affidavit, signed royalty confirmation, T1 information, 42 Vidalins at the courier desk in Minden. Therese called on the morning of October 17th. Her voice was different, more careful, the way voices get when the numbers are larger than the conversation you have been having. She said the title had been reviewed and cleared. I was the confirmed owner of record. Then she read me the royalty summary. 16 hectares. Confirmed mineral boundary intersection with the Rigitop Larder Lake lease. Production commenced 2001. Net smelter return royalty of 1.5%. Then she read the suspense account balance. 418,382 Canadian. I asked her to say it again. She said it again. Payment would release on the November 30th run. Based on the prior 24 months of production, the monthly royalty averaged $1,940. I asked whether there was any risk the funds had escaped to the province as unclaimed property. She said, "No, ma'am. An account isn't considered dormant if the registered holder has made contact." She paused for a moment. "Mrs. Hartley, this account has a contact log going back to 2003. The last correspondence on file from the previous claimant is dated March 6th of this year. March 6th, 28 days after the diagnosis. When I hung up, I went to the closet and put the blue suitcase away properly for the first time since August. I had been living out of it since the day I left Dundas, like a woman in a motel who has not yet decided. I put it on the shelf and closed the door. There was a dinner party on November 8th at 22 Rockcliffe Lane. Natalie sent a group text, friends, and several of Bryson's business contacts, dinner to show off what they had done with the renovations. The message ended, "Mom, you should come. Bring something if you like." I baked butter tart squares on Friday in the cottage oven that runs 25 degrees hot on one side. Saturday morning I loaded the car. The squares went in a tin on the back seat. The green deed box went in the trunk under a tea towel, the same way you cover something you are not ready to talk about yet. It is 247 kilometers from Hawk Lake Road to Dundas. I drove the same road in the other direction. The first time I made this drive, I did not know what I was carrying. I had cried at the rest stop outside Barrie that time. I did not cry this time. There were 26 people in my kitchen. I counted them twice because counting keeps my hand steady. The furniture from the February invoice, every piece of it. A bartender behind my own island, which is a slab of granite Bernard, picked out in 2011 because he liked the fossil patterns in it. Bryson was standing near the window with a glass of wine, talking to a man in a blazer who had a Haliburton County land map rolled under his arm. Aldous Strachan. He saw me. He lifted his glass about an inch. Natalie brought me through the hall with her hand on the small of my back, the way you steer someone who does not know the house. "Everybody, this is my mum. She's been up at the cottage all autumn, a proper retreat." People smiled. Someone said that sounded lovely. I put the tin of squares on the counter. Then I went back to the car and carried in the green deed box and set it on the granite island next to the wine glasses. I asked Bryson for 2 minutes. He said, "Mom, not right now," and turned back to the man he was talking to. I said it again at exactly the same volume. The room did what rooms do when a woman does not raise her voice but does not move. It went quiet in a circle that kept widening. I opened the box. I took out 4 documents and laid them side by side on the granite. I said, "On October 2nd, the Ontario Superior Court of Justice signed a vesting order establishing title to 16 hectares of mineral rights in the Larder Lake Mining Division, District of Timiskaming, in my name. It is registered at the Land Registry Office in Haliburton and at the Mining Lands Administration System in Sudbury. Ridgetop Minerals Limited of Toronto confirms production under a net smelter return royalty of 1.5%. There is $418,340 in a suspense account in my name, releasing November 30th. Going forward, approximately $940 per month." Nobody spoke. The man with the land map went very still. I set down the royalty confirmation statement. Then I turned toward the window. "Mr. Strachan, you told me twice that a mineral interest a person can't see isn't something most people can do anything with. You offered me $68,000 for this estate." I held up his offer letter and read paragraph 3 out loud. All of it. "The purchase price shall include all accrued, suspended, and unpaid proceeds attributable to the said mineral interest." Then I said, "You offered me $68,000 for an account you knew held $418,000. He set his wine glass on the sill and walked out through my dining room without collecting his coat. The door closed behind him. Bryson hit the granite with the flat of his hand. Glasses moved. He said Bernard had no right to this, twice, and his voice cracked on the second time. I did not raise mine. I said, "There's one more thing, and then I'll go." I laid out the HELOC registration document, the payoff statement, and the statute. Under Ontario's Succession Law Reform Act, a specific bequest passes to the beneficiary subject to all charges and encumbrances existing on the property at the date of death. The estate does not pay the HELOC off on your behalf. The house came to you with $140,000 still owing on it, and the estate account holds $34,200. I'm not a lawyer. Delphine Cote in Minden is. Her number is on this card. Someone near the fireplace said, "Oh my God," very quietly, the way people say it when they have just understood something that was in the room all evening. I put the card on the granite. Then I looked at my daughter. She was standing very still with a dish towel in her hands, holding it the way you hold something, when you are trying not to hold your own face. For a moment she looked like the girl I had known before any of this. Then it closed again, smooth as a drawer. "Kitchen's that way," she said, "if you want to set those out." I picked up the deed box. I said goodnight. I drove 247 kilometers north in the dark. Here is what happened after, measured the only way I know how. Natalie and Bryson listed the Dundas house on December 1st at $1,499,000. That is $151,000 under the appraisal their own lender ordered in August in a winter market with a $140,000 line of credit attached to the title. That is not a price. That is a decision being made in a hurry. As of the day I am telling you this, the house has had 2 showings and no offers. Aldous Strachan has not returned to Hawk Lake Road and has not called. Delphine sent his firm a letter advising that any further contact should come through her office. He signed the delivery confirmation. Ridgetop Minerals released the royalty account on November 30th, forwarded $18,340.82, wired to my credit union in Minden. It all arrives in the same tax year, so I set aside $112,000 in a separate account for the CRA, and I have not touched it. The day after the transfer cleared, I signed a seasonal road plowing contract for Hawk Lake Road. A man named Garth with a diesel truck and a twice-weekly schedule, December through March. $780 for the full season, paid in advance. That is what it cost to make my daughter's arithmetic wrong. $780. The furnace still clicks 4 times before it catches. I count them out loud now without noticing, the way you hum along to something playing in another room. The deed box sits on top of Bernard's old bookcase in the main room, lid open. I keep receipts in it now. The plowing contract, the royalty confirmation, the vesting order, the certified copy from the registry. I am not going to be the next person in this family who cannot prove what she owns. I have a roofer coming in May. $27,000 quoted and signed. New roof, repaired foundation step, the missing shutter back in place. It is still an ugly little cottage. It is mine. There is not $1 of debt on one board of it. I wrote Natalie a letter, 1 page. It took 3 tries to get the last sentence right. I wrote that I am not carrying anger because I have carried enough already. I wrote that there will be no loans, no co-signing, no advances of any kind, and that any question about her father's estate should go through Delphine. I wrote the last line twice before I got the words right. The door is open the day. You can tell me honestly what you thought was going to happen to me. We got our first real snow on November 29th. Garth came through before 7 in the morning, and the road was clear by 8. I made coffee and took it out to the porch in Bernard's barn coat and stood there and looked at the lake going white at the edges and the pines holding their snow and the sky doing what it does up here in December, going heavy and close and quiet in a way the city never is. He drove 3 hours north in March to wipe a kitchen table clean. He put 4 batteries in a freezer bag for a flashlight I hadn't packed yet. He wrote 22 letters, 1 every spring for 22 years, and never said a word about it over breakfast. He brought me the file. I brought the answer. If you have a piece of paper somewhere you have never properly read, a deed, an estate document, something in a folder you have always meant to open, go read the original, not the summary, not the version you remember hearing about, the original. That's all I know how to tell you. Subscribe if this made you think of something you've been putting off. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. I'll see you next time.